The wheel weaves as the wheel wills, and we are just a thread in the pattern. Welcome to Weaves and Will Talk, a weekly review podcast for fans of Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time book series and the Amazon show of the same name. With help from my nerdy friends, we will discuss aspects of fantasy fiction and review episodes of the Wheel of Time show as fans of the franchise. Join us as we explore Randland together. And remember, be steadfast. Hello and welcome to Weaves and Will Talk. We are counting down the days until the Wheel of Time show premiere in November. But in the meantime, we are talking about fantasy fiction. And today, we are talking about women in fantasy fiction. There are several great, vastly popular fantasy book series, and many have quite the cult following. Epic tales of adventure and heroism in fantastically fully fleshed out worlds have captivated audiences for decades. One such series that is expected to make the crossover from cult classic to popular cultural phenomenon is Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time. I began reading this series a couple of years ago, and 3 books into his 14-book endeavor, I knew I was reading something different. Robert Jordan was doing something different. His female characters were not the damsels in distress of classical myth or the edgy bad girls of modern fantasy made popular in television and cinema. Jordan's female characters had depth, flaws, and growth. They had their own plot lines, often independent of the male leads. They experienced little romance, and when they did, it was not to advance the hero's quest, but instead to explore their own choices and exercise autonomy over their own growth. But perhaps the starkest differences between Jordan's women and that of other notable fantasy writers like J.R.R. Tolkien and George R.R. Martin is the sheer number of female characters he uses. In fact, Tolkien is said to have more horses named in his novels than female characters. Though Tolkien and Martin will be used as examples of what the status quo is in modern fantasy fiction standards and tropes, they're not the only offenders. Authors like Terry Pratchett, Neil Gaiman, R.A. Salvatore, authors I love, but they also give far more attention to their male characters rather than female characters with significant depth or development. And it's not that there's no popular fantasy authors out there that utilize fully fleshed out female characters. The recent rise of authors like N.K. Jemisin, Nisi Shawl, Octavia Butler, and Nadia Okorafor specifically feature powerful women characters that are deeply complex and have compelling plot lines. However, it should be noted that all of the aforementioned authors are all female and women of color. The traditional powerhouses of this genre are typically male and white. As a result, the culture and gender and race perspective of the author seems to have a clear influence on the work itself. But this is why Jordan and his successor Brandon Sanderson, both white males, writing powerful female characters and female characters of color is so unique within the genre. But it's not just about what I think. Let's get into some will talk. Hello and welcome back to Weaves and Will Talk. We have a special guest on the show, what I call my Tolkien nerd friend and geek expert of the night. Say hello to Ben, everybody. Ben, say hi.
How's it going?
Okay, Ben, gonna cut straight to it. Who do you like better, Tolkien or Jordan?
Um, hmm, Not really a tough one at all. I gotta go with Tolkien.
I knew you were gonna do that. Otherwise, you'd also feel like the wrath of the internet upon you. But I am curious why.
Um, Probably because Tolkien was one of the first um, actual fantasy novels I ever read as a child, um, and I blew through his books at 8 years old, and it was kind of like an epiphany moment for me, opening my mind to an imagination, um, the way no other story had or has since then. So really, nothing can compare to that.
Yeah, I wish I had gotten into it when I was younger. Actually, I was not into fantasy until much later. That I'm now kind of switching there. I was a sci-fi girl, and before then, I was just a girly girl that read like Babysitter's Club. So I'm late edition, so I don't have that nostalgic love for him. But I can tell you, I do love his detail, particularly because of the whole Elvish and old Elvish. Like he not only created the second language, but he created the archaic form of it. For formal events.
Yeah, there's like I can't think of an author that put as much detail in his books as he did. Like there's no way that compares. Him being a linguist and a historian and having backstories for every single culture in his book and languages for them. Just that's crazy amount of detail.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he holds the record as the first constructed language, particularly constructed language for purely a literary purpose. Outside of code work, if you wanted to include those, I wouldn't. But eh. But okay, so Tolkien, clear winner in your book. What attracted you to Jordan?
Um, I was in college at the time I first read his books, and um, it just seemed like a nice take on epic fantasy. I don't think up until that point I had read any that were as in depth as his, as far as modern fantasy. Um, and I mean, he went into detail, not quite as much as Tolkien, but his books, like how long they were, and how much he said about his world. Where I mean, there's few authors that can compare on that level.
Now, I would definitely agree on length. He hits all the even fantasy boundaries he starts pushing with that kind of book length,
Yeah.
especially considering how expansive a series it is. It's not a trilogy; it's a box set, more than
One
Avengers
time,
Seven.
and when I was in college, I accidentally printed out 10 of his books at the library.
So the reason the Amazon rainforest is in trouble.
Yeah, they cut it off at like 800 pages.
Holy wow! Oh,
Yep.
and see, and I wish I could say I stumbled upon, his series and read the first book or two and fell immediately in love. That is not what happened. I was threatened by bodily injury from family members and friends if I didn't give the book a chance. And so I did, and I read the first one, and I hated it with a passion. And I was just assured if you just stick in till book three, after that we'll cut you loose, no harm done, we'll just let it go, bygones, bygones. But of course, book two was slightly better than book one, and book three was better than both two. And when it got to the end, I'm like, well, I kind of want to know what happened to X, Y, and Z. I'll read a little bit of book four. Fast forward 14 books.
Yep. Sometimes it happens that way. I
Yeah.
don't know if that series was Jordan's first, but yeah, a lot of authors that happens. They spit out one book and it's garbage,
Yep.
and they just keep going with the series and improve as writers as they go.
Yeah, he had well planned garbage. I'll give him that. And I've been told, I don't know if I'll ever discover this on my own, but I've been told by several people books 1 and 2 are much better on the reread. Because our when we discussed it, we came to the conclusion that maybe the problem with the first book is just information overload. Because he's so
Could be.
detailed, because everything's important, because everything's a seed to be later used or later seen develop, it's just way too much at one time, so it just feels like you're watching a documentary, you don't even know what the topic is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Could be.
but it took me years to get through the other books. I'm not going to start a reread anytime soon. But I will tell you, the one thing that did catch my attention fairly quickly in the series was the number of female characters. And that's one thing that Tolkien cannot boast on. What are your thoughts on that? Because he gets smoked by
I think
Jordan.
Jordan did that on purpose because of his mythology of the male and female types of magic supposed to be in balance. So there needed to be a strong female presence in order to establish both halves, I guess. As far as Tolkien, he was definitely a product of his time. And as far as like specifically Lord of the Rings, my view is it's an allegory for World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And I think consideration needs to be taken of the fact that women were not allowed in the British Army until 2015. So the fellowship itself was almost like, a military band. So there's that aspect. But I think most importantly is that Tolkien was a student and lover of history, and his cultures were in the books were based on other human cultures, and their gender roles were also pretty strict. So him, all of that combined, him being a product of his time, it being an allegory for fighting in World War II, and him using actual history as a base, all culminated in a substantial lack of female presence.
And I completely agree with two of your points. He definitely was a product of time. You can't take him from that or take the author out of the era which he was in. That's perfectly acceptable. Also, perfectly acceptable the fact that a lot of it was based on his World War II experience, as you pointed out. Absolutely. But borrowing from other cultures, I'm sorry, I feel like that's a cop out for a fantasy author, which you literally can do anything. You can get inspired by, actual existing cultures or historical societies and civilizations, but it's a fantasy novel. You got monsters and orcs and giant spiders and talking trees. You can change gender roles if you wanted to. So to me, that just seems like he wasn't interested in playing with gender dynamics in a way that Jordan wasn't afraid of.
That's probably mostly true, except for the fact that Tolkien's cultures were based on specific human cultures, like the dwarves were heavily influenced by the Norse. The Kingdom of Rohan was kind of a blend of Norse and Anglo-Saxon. And yes, it is fantasy. You could do basically whatever the hell he wanted. But there's also the fact that before him, no one had done that. And he basically created the genre of fantasy. So I think his, as far as he went with it, was further than anyone else had gone.
Yeah, that I will agree with, and I would have no problem dubbing him the creator of modern fantasy or modern fantasy literature, to be sure, because you might have to argue it with some of the scholars about the first fantasy creator, because you got
Yeah,
the epics and Beowulf pops
fairy
to mind.
tales. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, that point is well taken. But I still think if it's something you want to do, you can base it on a group of people and tweak it, rather than it being an homage to them. But
True, and I think Tolkien um, did kind of press the envelope in places. He did have a few strong female characters, and
hmm
some of them were instrumental. And like I said, with it being an allegory for World War II, there were women in World War II who were basically support, and I think some of the female characters in his books took on that same role, like Galadriel. If it weren't for her and her helping out the Fellowship, um, Frodo would have died from the giant spider Shelob,
hmm
and that would have been the end of the story right there.
and wasn't the warrior Agwin I would never get the name right.
Eowyn,
That's the one.
yep.
Yeah,
She,
she broke
as far as I'm concerned,
stereotypes.
yeah, I mean, she was a perfect example of pushing against gender roles. I mean, that's literally in her dialogue, going against what her father wanted, and
hmm
single-handedly killing the Witch King in battle. And but again, you go back to the relationship with that kind of story to actual history, and she mirrors Viking shield maidens quite a bit.
mm
And as far as I'm concerned, she probably became a martyr for the Middle Earth women's suffrage movement at some point in the future.
I want that T-shirt so badly.
There you
Oh, oh, I gotta see. I gotta make that happen.
go.
Well, whatever women's movement was taking place in Randland, for lack of a better term, they succeeded because women run the world as we know it. And
True.
that was phenomenal. Though most of the women admittedly got on my nerves, I was still proud to have them in
Same.
positions. Exactly.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
In some places, I think he may have pushed it a little too far with you know this whole group of sorceresses not trying to work with their male counterparts, but trying to control them and capture them, things like that. I think that probably pushed the envelope a little farther than equality.
Well, in their defense, they had a history that suggested stronger actions.
True.
Because when the guys messed up, they didn't make a teeny tiny little mistake with magic. just put it out there. It may have still been an overreaction, but not much of one.
Agreed.
But I just remember that caught my attention, which is, why I wrote my thesis on it. God bless Robert Jordan for that. But when I started really looking into it, it wasn't, I pull out Tolkien because he is such the icon of the field. Martin's trying to take that position, but he's always going to still be a student of Tolkien. He's the grandfather.
It's true.
So I hold him up as an example, but you can pull pretty much any past, present, and possibly future fantasy author, especially if they're male, and you're just not going to see that representation. Even in other
Yeah.
books since Jordan, you don't see that level of representation
Yeah.
unless you
That's
go
true.
into female authors. And even with some of them, you won't see it, but at least you have a better chance there, or people of color authors as well.
In defense of male authors, I'm trying to be a male author myself.
Ah,
Um, I would say I lean away from female main characters not because of any kind of bias or anything, but simply because it's hard for me to understand women. And you need to understand your main character to write about them.
It is a helpful quality, yes. But I will challenge you with this. I don't think Jordan, and if I remember correctly in the interview, he agrees with me, but I don't think Jordan does understand women that well. He just does his best. And so we applaud his
I would
efforts.
probably agree with that,
yeah. Yeah, but I think in an interview he even said, no, I don't think I do at all. But, A for effort.
Yep, there you go.
But yeah, I would like to see it. I would like to see, it doesn't have to be quite the onslaught of Wheel of Time, but just higher numbers, and why not have, the female protagonist by herself? I mean, fellowships are nice. The adventure team and dungeoneering group, that's great. How about a solo? Can we get a Star Wars-esque Luke that's not a generic carbon copy of Luke called something different and then repackaged as another movie? Yeah.
Called Ray?
Yeah. We're not going to talk about that. I mean, a protagonist in her own right.
Okay.
Because that literally was shot for shot A New Hope. I'm like, no, that's not a new story. So, no. I want it with the same nuance and wonder that Luke introduced when it was first premiered, except with an original story. But
Gotcha.
it seems like more often than not, at least Hollywood is willing to put in a female character, but not put in the effort for an original story.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
Yeah.
Like rebooting things like Ghostbusters and just changing the gender of all the main characters instead of coming up with a new independent story.
Yeah, well, I'm even okay with keeping the original story as long as the adaptations you make because of the gender swap make sense. You still have to make a good movie. Literally,
forcing it is a problem.
There you go. That's the word. Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, it still has to be a good story. Then you can look at the genders and races too, for that matter, when they switch it out.
I agree.
At the risk of upsetting too much of the internet out there, I'm not going to name the movie, but there is a movie that came out that I was looking forward to because I watched its predecessor on the small screen, and all of a sudden when it hits the movie theater, not only did it change fundamental things like name pronunciations, but it changed the ethnicities of the characters, where it somehow worked out that all the protagonists were light-colored in their skin tone, and all the antagonists were suddenly dark. And that is not in the original version of it. And to this day, that director and I do not get along. Not that he knows about how angry I am. But that's not going to stop me from being forever angry. But like I said, that's a change that serves no purpose. And any purpose you might attribute to it is a negative purpose. Which makes it even worse. And the story was so good, all you had to do was follow the directions.
Yeah, I mean, that's what a book is. It's literally directions for how to write a movie.
Yeah, the hard work is done. All you have to do now is trim out the things that, can afford to be because it's a different media. That's it.
Yep.
And yet, I am optimistic and yet terrified for the Wheel of Time. Because once again, you have your blueprint. It's there. Mm-hmm. It's beloved. It's established. It has been through its paces. Don't change it.
I am kind of leery about it. Because speaking of gender roles and things like that, the trailer hardly focused on the main characters at all. Like, there were some focusing on, like, the women sorcerers and sorceresses and things like that. But, like, did Rand even speak at all? Like, even once?
I don't think he did.
Yeah, it just seemed odd.
Huh. But they may be trying to just kind of tease that further in the trailers, though.
Could be.
Maybe.
That was just the first one.
Yeah. I know they released another one recently. I haven't seen that to date, so I'll have to pull that up. Yeah, I think it focuses on one of the other Tal'Verin, but I can't remember who. But yeah, it always frightens me when you have the bona fide blueprint of a story, and because you've seen people wreck it. for no need whatsoever. And this one's got so much detail, so much,
Yep.
lore that
So
it
much
creates.
content.
Yeah. So I am optimistic because everything I've seen so far still looks good, but I'm a little
See,
worried.
the problem is, at the end of the day, making a movie is about money
Mm-hmm.
and it's business. And uh, to be able to tackle something that vast, you
Mm-hmm.
really need someone in charge who is an actual fan of the story itself.
I
Because
said
otherwise,
that.
he's not going to give it if he
Oh,
can make a dime.
I have said that so many times. That's the first rule of business. If I were the creator of the content, I'd need a fan in charge of it because
Yep.
they will understand. In fact, my preference would be not only to have a fan directing it in all the major production positions, whether small or large screen, but to have like a contingency of nerds, like the kind that know what the Jeffrey Tubes numbers for Star Trek ships. That
Yep.
level nerd.
What
So
was great about Lord of the Rings, the movies, is that Ian McKellen was that nerd.
really,
He, yes, him and I forgot his name, played Saruman. Um, they were big Tolkien fans, and Ian McKellen actually met Tolkien while he was alive. And
ooh,
in the background and behind the scenes, if they were trying to do something that Ian McKellen didn't agree with because it was not what Tolkien wrote, he called out Peter Jackson on it and was
that's what
like,
I'm talking about.
"No, this is bullshit. You need to change this."
Yeah, that's what I want on every set of every major following for a book or graphic novel or whatever cartoon, whatever that you're trying to turn into something it originally was not.
Yep.
We need nerd police on every set.
There you go. I saw a meme about that actually. It was about a employment position for all movies where their sole job was to take the book and smack the director with it anytime he tried to get creative.
I like that. That's perfect. It fits within the budget.
There
That's
you go.
no problem. I will say one thing, and I won't go into detail because I don't want to spoil anything for our audience. But there are some culturally risque is not the word, but divergent cultures in Wheel of Time too that I'm curious to see how they're going to handle, for the
True.
audience. Because while
Yeah.
it's not anything salacious or really adult oriented, but it's not typical kind of illustrations of culture we see on just regular television.
True.
So I'm a little concerned how they're going to handle that in certain relationships. How are they going to handle that?
Hey, they made it. They made a TV show about the Sword of Truth, and as far as I'm concerned, the Sword of Truth series was a straight plagiarism knockoff of Wheel of Time, and
Really?
that has some straight like BDSM scenes in it. I'm telling you.
Wow. No, I haven't watched it, but if they're willing to go that far, Wheel of Time does not require that kind of commitment. So,
Don't read the books either. Don't
oh,
read the books either.
okay.
No.
Huh. Yeah, see, but now you've given me a challenge of don't read, and part of me wants to automatically. Like, I'd
Like
be lying
I
if I.
read them. I read them concurrently, like as they were being released back in the day, and I would read the newest book of Wheel of Time, and then I would read the newest book of Sword of Truth, and I'm like, I just read it. It
was
was straight plagiarism.
was it at least slightly better writing or anything?
No, it was worse.
Oh no.
Yeah, it's worse. And there's some real like psychotic scenes in that book. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. It wasn't good either.
Now I'm really curious about reading. I'm probably going to end up getting the first book. I'm not. If I'm honest, I probably will because now it's just
Do it.
morbid. It's just
And
morbid
I will
curiosity,
say, I told you so.
and I will accept it. But I really want to know how bad it is now. Well, I think that is a perfect note to end this on, and I will be on my Audible or Amazon account as soon as we're done. But no, for real, thank you for joining me tonight, Ben. This was really fun.
No problem. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Hope to have you again when we're reviewing episodes.
Yeah, I can't wait for the series.
Woo! Not long now.
And we'll have to do the same for the Lord of the Rings series.
Absolutely. You'll get your own logo and music and everything.
There we go.
We got it hooked up.
All right, I'm in.
All right, then.
All right, talk to you later.
Join us next week for more Weaves and Will Talk. And please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. May you find shade, my friends.
Female magic users and the male main protagonist, all of that is in there. It's an exact freaking copy. It just pissed me off.
Yeah, totally checking it
I
out.
don't recommend it to anybody.
Nope, totally checking it out. Totally doing it. I mean, you were the same person that was looking for durian fruit at one point, okay? Sometimes we just beg for punishment.
True. Yep.